Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our studies of Second Kings. Today we're in Second Kings chapter 7. Now, as we mentioned in our reading yesterday, in Second Kings chapter 7, you have a continuation of the things that occur in chapter 6. And as we look at some lessons in chapter 7 today, I want us to see, to start with, the correlation between chapter 7 and chapter 6. Chapter 7 begins with, "Then Elisha said," and so it builds on the things that have happened at the end of chapter 6. So let's look at a couple of things here in this chapter. I want to begin here with verse 1 and see that there is a very real sense in which God, by driving away the Syrians, is going to save Elisha, even more than what he's doing to save Samaria itself. When you come to the end of chapter 6, the king of Israel has decided that Elisha is the problem. He no longer is going to allow God to have a sentiment or a statement. He doesn't believe that God is going to help, or that God cares, or that there's any sense in believing in God. And he makes the statement toward the end of chapter 6 that he makes a promise that Elisha will not be living by the end of the day. And it is going to be while the messenger from the king is coming to Elisha that Elisha is going to look at the elders of Israel. He's going to speak to them. And then what we have in chapter 7, verse 1 is what is going to be said, that by tomorrow, all of this will be over, so to speak. The statement is made that a seah of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel. In other words, for a very low amount. Remember, this is at a time where a donkey's head is being sold for 50 shekels because the people are starving. And so, a seah of fine flour is going to be relatively easy to come by, and 2 seahs of barley for the same price. And so when God delivers the people of Samaria, it is not just a matter of him worrying about their circumstance and their condition. It is very much a situation where he is taking care of his servant who is about to lose his life at the hands of the king. Now, on the other side of things, you also are going to have in verse 2 a description of an officer who, upon being told by Elisha the things that are going to transpire, doesn't believe him. He does not believe Elisha. He does not believe in God. As a matter of fact, he says, look, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, could this thing be? In other words, if we could see right up to the throne of God, could this actually happen? Could this actually be? In other words, I don't believe for a second that this is actually going to take place. What the officer is essentially accusing Elisha of is simply trying to save his own skin. That he's making this particular promise, he's making this prophecy, it's not actually going to happen, it didn't actually come from God, it's just Elisha trying to save himself from the death that the king ordered. Now, Elisha is going to respond by saying, in fact, you will see it with your eyes, but you will not partake of it. And at the end of the chapter, we're going to find out that that is exactly what is going to take place, because this particular officer is put in charge of the gates. And when you're put in charge of the gates of a starving city, and the starving city realizes and finds out that there is food just outside the walls, you better get out of the way. And this officer did not. He was trampled by the mob. But this officer did not believe Elisha, because ultimately he did not believe in God. But secondly, he did not believe that Elisha actually spoke for God, especially in this particular instance. So the lesson for us in this is, when God speaks, he means what he says. And unless there's proof that God's spokesman was not speaking the way that he should, then we have an obligation to listen and to believe. Now, there are instances in Scripture where inspired writers write things that are quoted from other people and things of that nature, that where the people that were speaking were not telling the truth. We understand that. But the recollection and the account and the things that are given are in and of themselves true. Here we have a situation where an individual disbelieved God. And God is going to make his point, but the making of his point is going to come in and of itself with a curse that goes along with it. We need to be careful about our belief, that we don't just believe when it's easy, and that we don't just believe what is easy when it comes to God's promises and what God says, but rather that we are ones who believe even when it seems improbable, because we have the evidence of the truth and the honesty of God. But now for the third aspect of it. I want to take us to the lepers that are in the city of Samaria. We read of them in the central portion of the chapter, and they are in a situation where they are starving. They are in the gates of the city, and yet at the same time, they kind of reach this ultimatum. We can either stay here and die of starvation, or we can go out and see what the Syrians might do. There's not going to be anything any worse than our current situation that's going to come, and who knows, they may treat us better. But they get outside the city, and they get to the camp of the Syrians, and the Syrians are gone. They've been scared off. And they have been scared off in such a way that they have left everything behind, which was God's plan. And so they go through, and these lepers begin looting the tents. And the first tent they come to, they eat and they drink, something that they haven't done in quite some time. And then they take things from the tent, and they go and they bury them. They hide them in a place that only they know about. And as they start working with the second tent, it's stated in verse 9 that they look at each other and they say, we're not doing right. And it's not because in and of themselves they are doing what's wrong, but rather they have information that the people in the city need to have, and right now they are only looking out for themselves when there is more than enough for everyone. And so they say to themselves in verse 9, "This day is a day of good news, and we remain silent. If we wait until morning light, some punishment will come upon us." In other words, if we don't tell and people find out that we knew, we're going to be in trouble. You see here in these verses the conscience of the lepers. It is not so much that they feel like they owe it to the people of Samaria, because in one sense they are outcasts because they are lepers. But on the other side of it, they know how this can help the people, and they also know how the people could make their lives even worse were they to find out that they did not tell. So once again, we have this illustration of honesty being important, and of honesty and being one who is helpful and courteous and one who can be trusted has its value and has its benefits. And so here we see with these lepers the willingness to go and to tell those people at the gate, which then pass it on to the king, hey, the army is gone. You're no longer under siege, whether you realize it or not. Everything has been left behind. And Samaria will immediately be back on its feet. Now, once the message is delivered, the king doesn't really believe it. His servants have to talk him into actually sending people out to examine the evidence and to see if it's actually the case. He thinks it's a trap. But at the same time, without the report of the lepers, there is no telling how long they would have gone before they actually would have realized what was going on. These are some of the things that I found in 2 Kings chapter 7, and I hope they are things that have been beneficial to you. Next time we'll come back and we'll begin looking at chapter 8. I hope you'll join us then. But until then, have a great day.